"They didn't just break the rules," I muttered, my voice trembling with rage. "They trespassed. They vandalized. They murdered my vegetables." I got my lawyer, thankfully. He picked up right away. "They destroyed it," I tell him. "They came in last night and they destroyed my entire garden." My lawyer's tone on the phone went from calm to concerned to downright angry. "They did what? Did you get it on video?" he asked. "Yes, I have Dick and a bunch of other people on video destroying it all," I confirm. "George, don't do a thing. Don't approach them. Don't talk to them. Don't even look at them. I am filing a lawsuit as we speak. This is beyond the pale. They have broken several laws, and we are going to make sure that not only are you compensated, but they learn they cannot get away with this." He sounded furious. He assured me, "Hold tight, I am on it. I will call you later. Let me tell you about my happy place. It's not a tropical beach or a mountaintop cabin or a fancy spa. Nope, it's my backyard. Specifically, my vegetable garden. I'm Ben Gardner, and I'm what you might call a passionate gardener. I'm not talking about a few sad tomato plants in pots. I'm talking about a full-blown backyard farm bursting with life, flavor, and the sweet, sweet smell of homegrown goodness. My garden is my pride and joy. I built raised beds, 4 of them to be exact, and they're overflowing with life. I've got rows of plump, juicy tomatoes in every color imaginable: red, yellow, orange, even purple. I've got bell peppers, ranging from sweet and mild to fiery hot. I may have accidentally planted a ghost pepper plant last year. That was a fun week. I've got zucchini that grows so fast I swear I can see it happening in real time, and herbs: basil, oregano, thyme, rosemary, mint. Enough to supply a small Italian restaurant. And then it arrived, the letter. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it clearly. I was out in the garden harvesting a basketful of zucchini. Seriously, those things are prolific. When I saw it, that dreaded cream-colored envelope lying innocently on my front porch. The Silver Creek Homeowners Association logo was printed neatly in the corner, a symbol that filled me with a sense of impending doom. "Oh no," I muttered, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Not again." I have a history with the Silver Creek HOA. I ripped open the envelope, my heart sinking with each word I read. "Violation notice, landscaping," it began, in that cold, formal tone that HOAs seem to specialize in. "It has come to our attention that you have a vegetable garden located in a visible area of your property. As per Section 12, Paragraph C of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, vegetable gardens are not permitted within visible areas of resident properties. Only ornamental plants are allowed. Please remove all non-ornamental plants within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in fines and potential further action." Non-ornamental. I stared at the letter, my jaw hanging open. Non-ornamental? Were they serious? What was more ornamental than a vibrant, thriving vegetable garden, bursting with color and life? What was more beautiful than a perfectly ripe tomato glistening in the sun? Were they suggesting I replace my delicious homegrown food with, what, plastic flowers? Garden gnomes dressed in tiny HOA uniforms? "They're trying to ban my vegetables, Rachel," I exclaimed, pacing my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. "My vegetables! They're saying they're not decorative enough. Can you believe this? What am I supposed to do? Plant a garden full of plastic flamingos and call it a day?" Rachel, my best friend and a fellow gardener, who, thankfully, lived outside the iron fist of the Silver Creek HOA, just sighed on the other end of the line. "Dick Kensington's at it again, huh?" she said. "He's probably jealous because your tomatoes are bigger and juicier than his ego." "Dick Kensington," I growled. The name was like nails on a chalkboard. Richard Dick Kensington III, president of the Silver Creek HOA, and the self-appointed guardian of all things bland and beige. "Don't let that pompous jerk get to you, Ben," Rachel continued. "Fight him. Fight for your right to grow your own food." "Oh, I'm going to fight him," I said, my voice hardening with resolve. "But I'm not just going to fight him with words. I'm going to fight him with horticulture." The next HOA meeting was my chance to make my case, to defend my garden, to stand up for the rights of vegetable-loving homeowners everywhere. I armed myself with photographic evidence, pictures of my beautiful, bountiful garden, pictures of happy neighbors enjoying my fresh produce. I even printed out some articles about the benefits of urban gardening and the importance of locally grown food. I was ready for a reasoned, logical debate. Spoiler alert, HOA meetings are never about reason or logic. The meeting was held, as always, in the Silver Creek Community Center, a room that seemed to have been deliberately designed to be as sterile and uninspiring as possible. And then, he walked in, Richard Dick Kensington III, the man, the myth, the legend, the HOA president who apparently had a personal vendetta against anything edible growing in a residential area. Dick Kensington was, well, he was a dick. He was a tall, thin man with a receding hairline, a perpetually smug expression, and the kind of tightly wound posture that suggested he spent his days measuring blades of grass with a ruler. He was wearing a crisp, white polo shirt tucked into khaki pants, the unofficial uniform of the terminally uptight. He took his place at the head of the table, gavel in hand, and surveyed the room with a look of barely concealed disdain. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "Let's get straight to business. We have a situation to address." He clicked a button, and a projector flickered to life, displaying a PowerPoint presentation. The title slide read, "Maintaining a Pristine and Uniform Landscape in Silver Creek, A Guide to Compliance." Oh boy, here we go, I thought, rolling my eyes. Dick launched into a long, rambling lecture about the importance of curb appeal, property values, and maintaining a consistent aesthetic throughout the community. He showed slides of approved landscaping, perfectly manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and not a single vegetable in sight. It was like looking at a Stepford Wives convention for gardens. And then, he got to my garden. A picture of my backyard flashed on the screen, my beautiful, vibrant, food-producing garden, labeled in bold red letters, Exhibit A, Unsightly Vegetation. Unsightly vegetation? I almost choked on my own spit. "As you can see," Dick said, his voice dripping with disdain, "Mr. Gardner's property is in flagrant violation of our landscaping guidelines." This garden," he said the word like it was a disease, "is a disruption to the uniform aesthetic of Silver Creek. It's chaotic. It's overgrown." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. "We are a community of pristine lawns and ornamental plantings, Mr. Gardner, not a farm. We must uphold a refined suburban aesthetic." I stood up, ready to defend my garden with every fiber of my being. "Dick," I began, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. It was a struggle. "With all due respect, my garden has been there for years. No one's ever complained before. In fact, most of the neighbors love it. I share my produce with them. It's a source of community, of fresh, healthy food." I pointed to the pictures I'd brought. "Look at these tomatoes, Dick. Look at these peppers. These are not unsightly vegetation. These are delicious, nutritious vegetables." I even tried to appeal to his, apparently non-existent, sense of reason. "And besides, Dick, there's nothing in the HOA rules that specifically bans vegetable gardens. It just says they can't be in visible areas. I mean, come on, what even defines visible? Dick just waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a pesky fly. "It's not about the food, Mr. Gardner," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's about standards. It's about maintaining the image of Silver Creek. And your vegetable patch simply doesn't fit in. It's unrefined." Unrefined? My blood started to boil. This wasn't about standards. It was about control. It was about Dick Kensington's personal vendetta against anything that didn't fit his narrow, outdated, and frankly boring vision of suburban perfection. "Dick," I said, my voice now edged with steel, "it's a garden. It's not hurting anyone. It's actually benefiting the community. And frankly, I think it's a lot more attractive than your perfectly manicured but utterly lifeless lawn." Dick's face turned a shade of red that rivaled my ripest tomatoes. "This is not up for debate, Mr. Gardner," he snapped. "The rules are clear. The garden must go." "We'll see about that," I muttered under my breath. After that infuriating HOA meeting, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Dick Kensington win. I was going to fight this. I was going to fight for my right to grow zucchini in peace. I started researching my legal options, looking for precedents, for cases where homeowners had successfully challenged similar HOA restrictions. I was building my arsenal, preparing for a full-blown legal battle. "I'm going to take him down, Rachel," I said to my friend over the phone. "I'm going to make him regret the day he messed with my tomatoes." "You go, Ben," Rachel cheered. "Give him hell." I was feeling confident, empowered, ready to take on the HOA and their ridiculous rules. I was envisioning myself standing victorious in my garden, surrounded by thriving vegetables, while Dick Kensington wept in the distance. And then I woke up one morning to a nightmare. I usually start my day with a quick stroll through my garden, checking on my plants, admiring their progress, maybe even harvesting a few early tomatoes for breakfast. It's a peaceful, calming ritual, a way to connect with nature before diving into the digital world of software development. But this morning, something was wrong. As I stepped out onto my patio, I felt a sense of unease, a prickling of dread. The air was still. The birds were silent, and the usual vibrant green of my garden was missing. I walked closer, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. My garden was gone. It wasn't just overgrown or neglected or even slightly damaged. It was destroyed. The raised beds were ripped apart, splintered wood scattered across the yard. The plants, my beautiful, thriving vegetable plants, were uprooted, torn from the soil, and tossed aside like garbage. Tomatoes were smashed, peppers were crushed, zucchini were... Well, let's just say they weren't going to be winning any beauty contests. The soil was churned up, a chaotic mess of dirt and debris. It looked like a bomb had gone off in my backyard. A bomb filled with pure, concentrated, HOA-approved hatred. I stood there, frozen, speechless, my mind reeling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like a scene from a horror movie, but instead of blood and gore, it was destroyed vegetables and broken dreams. First, I felt shock, a numb, disbelieving shock that made it hard to even process what had happened. Then, the shock gave way to heartbreak. I'd poured my heart and soul into that garden. I'd nurtured those plants from tiny seedlings. I'd watered them. I'd weeded them. I'd talked to them. Don't judge. And now they were gone. And then the heartbreak turned to fury, a cold, burning rage that consumed me. This wasn't just an accident. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was deliberate. This was personal. And I knew with absolute certainty who was responsible. Dick Kensington. He'd threatened to remove my unsightly vegetation. He'd declared war on my tomatoes. And now he'd followed through on his threat in the most cowardly, most destructive way possible. That bastard!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the empty, ravaged yard. I remembered the security cameras I'd installed a few years ago. I rushed inside, my hands shaking as I logged into my security system. I scrolled through the footage from the previous night, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. And there it was, clear as day, captured in the cold, unforgiving light of the security cameras, was the evidence of Dick Kensington's treachery. It showed a group of figures, led by Dick himself, sneaking into my backyard in the dead of night. They were carrying tools, shovels, rakes, even a wheelbarrow. They looked like a crew of suburban ninjas on a mission to eradicate all traces of vegetable life. The footage showed them systematically dismantling my garden, ripping out the raised beds, uprooting the plants, tossing them into garbage bags like they were garbage. Dick was even pointing and directing them, like some kind of demented orchestra conductor leading a symphony of destruction. I watched, my blood boiling, as they stomped on my tomatoes, crushed my peppers, and generally wreaked havoc on my beloved garden. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, a horrifying spectacle that I couldn't tear my eyes away from. "They didn't just break the rules," I muttered, my voice trembling with rage. "They trespassed. They vandalized. They murdered my vegetables." It was time for action. I grabbed my phone and dialed 2 numbers. First my lawyer, and second, the police. I got my lawyer. Thankfully, he picked up right away. "They destroyed it," I tell him. "They came in last night and they destroyed my entire garden." My lawyer's tone on the phone went from calm to concerned to downright angry. "They did what? Did you get it on video?" he asked. "Yes, I have Dick and a bunch of other people on video destroying it all," I confirm. "George, don't do a thing. Don't approach them. Don't talk to them. Don't even look at them. I am filing a lawsuit as we speak. This is beyond the pale. They have broken several laws, and we are going to make sure that not only are you compensated, but they learn they cannot get away with this." He sounded furious. He assured me, "Hold tight, I am on it. I will call you later." The police arrived shortly after I'd called them. 2 officers, taking notes and asking me questions. I show them around. I show them the video. "Mr. Gardner, we are taking this very seriously," one officer says. "We are going to take our time and make sure we have an airtight case, but rest assured we are going to be pressing charges." "Good," I reply. I knew it wouldn't bring back my garden, not this season anyway. But knowing that Dick Kensington and his cronies would face the consequences of their actions, that, at least, was a small comfort. It was a start, and it was fuel for my real plan. The plan that would turn my backyard into a monument to vegetable-growing defiance. The plan that involved a greenhouse. A very, very big greenhouse. It was time for a new strategy. I needed a way to grow my vegetables, to reclaim my backyard, but to do it in a way that the HOA, and specifically Dick Kensington, couldn't touch. I needed a loophole, a legal sanctuary for my plants. A vegetable fortress. And that meant, once again, facing the dreaded Silver Creek HOA bylaws. "Here we go again," I sighed, grabbing the binder and a large cup of coffee. Time to find a way to weaponize this thing. I spent hours that day, poring over the endless pages of rules and regulations, my eyes glazing over as I read about fence heights, mailbox colors, and the proper placement of decorative garden gnomes. Still a maximum of 12 inches, apparently. It was like navigating a legal minefield, designed to crush the spirit of anyone who dared to deviate from the beige, boring norm. "There's got to be something in here," I muttered, my frustration growing. "Some loophole, some technicality, anything I can use." And then I found it. Tucked away in Section 19, Exterior Structures and Improvements, like a hidden treasure buried beneath layers of bureaucratic jargon, was Rule #19B. I read it aloud, slowly, my voice filled with a growing sense of excitement. Outdoor plants, including flowers, shrubs, and trees, must comply with the community's aesthetic guidelines and are subject to review by the Architectural Committee. I paused, then continued, the words practically jumping off the page. However, permanent enclosed structures, such as greenhouses, solariums, or conservatories, are exempt from landscaping restrictions, provided they meet all county building codes and permitting requirements. I reread it. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time the words seemed to shine a little brighter, like a beacon of hope in the darkness of HOA tyranny. Permanent enclosed structures, exempt from landscaping restrictions? A slow, triumphant grin spread across my face. It was like the heavens had opened up, and a chorus of angels was singing the Hallelujah chorus. But instead of Hallelujah, they were singing hydroponic tomatoes. "This is it," I whispered, my eyes gleaming with mischievous glee. "This is my way out. This is my path to vegetable victory." Dick Kensington wanted to control what I grew in my backyard? Fine, I'd just grow it inside. Inside a permanent enclosed structure. Inside a greenhouse. And not just any greenhouse, mind you. Oh no. This was going to be a greenhouse of epic proportions. A greenhouse that would make Dick Kensington choke on his perfectly manicured, HOA-approved lawn. I'm thinking, botanical garden meets spaceship, I said to myself, grabbing a notepad and starting to sketch out my ideas. Glass walls, steel frame, climate control, the works. I envisioned a massive structure, dominating my backyard, a gleaming monument to my determination to grow my own damn vegetables no matter what. It would be a technological marvel, a self-contained ecosystem, it would be a giant middle finger to Dick Kensington wrapped in glass and steel. "This is going to be epic," I muttered, my grin widening. Epic and expensive. First things first, I needed contractors. I needed builders, electricians, plumbers. I needed a team. I started calling around, getting quotes, explaining my vision, carefully omitting the revenge part, of course. "So, you want to build a greenhouse?" one contractor asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "In your backyard? Like a big one?" "The biggest," I replied. "The best. Think Crystal Palace, but for tomatoes, and peppers, and zucchini, and maybe some exotic fruits just for kicks." The contractor chuckled. "All right then, sounds like a fun project." I finally settled on a team that seemed both competent and slightly amused by my grandiose plans. They understood the vision, or at least they understood that I was willing to pay a lot of money to make it happen. Then came the design phase. I wanted glass walls to maximize sunlight. I wanted a sturdy steel frame to withstand the elements and any potential HOA-related sabotage. I wanted a climate control system to keep my plants happy and productive year-round. And because I was going all in, I decided to add a hydroponic growing system. No more messy soil, no more weeds, just pure, nutrient-rich water delivering everything my plants needed to thrive. I also wanted, and got, automated irrigation. "And solar panels," I added, almost as an afterthought. "Gotta be sustainable, you know. And also it'll save me money on electricity in the long run." The contractors looked at each other, then back at me. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" one of them asked. "Dead serious," I replied. "I'm going to grow the best damn vegetables in Silver Creek, HOA be damned." The construction process was a whirlwind of activity. My backyard was transformed into a construction site, filled with the noise of power tools, the clang of metal, and the constant chatter of the work crew. First, they poured a concrete foundation, a solid base for my future greenhouse empire. It was much larger than my old garden, extending almost to the property line. Then, the frame arrived. It was massive, a skeleton of steel beams outlining the shape of my greenhouse-to-be. It looked like they were building a small aircraft hangar, not a place to grow cucumbers. "This thing is impressive, Mr. Gardener," one of the workers said, shaking his head in awe. "Impressive is my middle name," I replied, grinning. It's actually Robert, but they didn't need to know that. The glass panels were installed next, transforming the steel skeleton into a gleaming, transparent structure. It was beautiful. It was imposing. It was huge. And then, it was time for the technology. I installed the high-tech automated hydroponic system, complete with nutrient reservoirs, pumps, timers, and a control panel that looked like it belonged on the Starship Enterprise. I added the solar panels to the roof, a nod to sustainability and a way to further reduce my reliance on the grid. And, of course, I installed LED grow lights, so my plants could thrive even on cloudy days or at night. And because I'm all about making a statement, and because I wanted to leave no doubt about who had inspired this whole project, I decided to add one final, glorious touch. I registered my greenhouse as an official urban agriculture research site. It sounded impressive, it gave me a little extra legal protection, always a good idea when dealing with HOAs, and best of all, it allowed me to claim a small tax break. "Take that, Uncle Sam," I muttered, filling out the paperwork. And then I put up a sign. A big, bold, professionally made sign that read, "Kensington Urban Agriculture Research Site, Cultivating Excellence and Defiance." I placed it right at the front of the greenhouse, facing the street, where Dick Kensington couldn't possibly miss it. It was the perfect finishing touch, the icing on the cake, the fertilizer on the tomatoes. My greenhouse was complete. It was a masterpiece. It was a monument to my stubbornness, my creativity, and my love of fresh vegetables. And it was all thanks to Dick Kensington and his ridiculous rules. I almost wanted to send him a thank you note. Almost. The transformation was complete. My backyard, once a scene of horticultural carnage, was now dominated by a massive, gleaming greenhouse. It was like a spaceship had landed in the middle of Silver Creek, a futuristic glass and steel structure that dwarfed everything around it. It was beautiful. It was audacious. It was exactly what I'd envisioned. I salvaged a few sad-looking tomato plants that had somehow survived Dick's rampage, and I carefully transplanted them into the hydroponic system of the greenhouse. I also started new seedlings, tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, herbs, even a few experimental crops like strawberries and melons. I was determined to make this greenhouse the most productive, most diverse, most envy-inducing urban farm in the history of suburbia. And it worked. The greenhouse was a miracle of modern horticulture. The plants thrived in the controlled environment, growing faster and producing more food than I'd ever thought possible. I was soon harvesting baskets overflowing with fresh, delicious produce, more than I could possibly eat myself. The neighbors, who'd initially been curious and slightly bewildered by the massive structure in my backyard, were now amazed and impressed. They'd stop by to admire the greenhouse, to ask questions about the hydroponic system, and, of course, to sample the fruits and vegetables of my labor. "This is incredible, Ben," Dave said, biting into a perfectly ripe tomato. "You've turned your backyard into a freaking Garden of Eden." "It's like something out of a science fiction movie," Mrs. Henderson added, gazing up at the glass roof. "But with tomatoes?" And then it happened. Dick Kensington saw it. I'd been waiting for this moment, anticipating it with a mixture of glee and trepidation. I knew he'd drive by eventually. He couldn't resist. And sure enough, one afternoon, I saw his car, that meticulously clean beige sedan slowly cruising down the street. He came to a screeching halt in front of my house, his jaw dropping open, his eyes widening in disbelief. He just sat there for a long moment, staring at the greenhouse, his face slowly turning a shade of red that rivaled my ripest tomatoes. It was a beautiful sight. Then he stormed. He flung open his car door and marched up my driveway with the determined stride of a man on a mission to complain, to condemn, to be Dick Kensington. "What have you done?" he yelled, his voice cracking with outrage, his perfectly combed hair slightly askew. He pointed a trembling finger at the greenhouse, as if it were some kind of alien spacecraft that had landed in his pristine, HOA-approved neighborhood. I, meanwhile, was calmly tending to my tomato plants inside the greenhouse, wearing my gardening gloves and a smug smile. I walked towards the glass door, taking my time, letting the anticipation build. "Oh, this, Dick?" I said, my voice dripping with mock innocence as I stepped outside. "This is my new greenhouse, a permanent enclosed structure, as per Section 19, subsection B, Rule #19B of the HOA bylaws. Perfectly legal, you see." I gestured towards the sign, Kensington Urban Agriculture Research Site. I've even registered it as an official research site. Very educational, you know. I then held out a basket overflowing with ripe red tomatoes. "Care for one, Dick? Freshly picked? Homegrown? Completely non-ornamental, of course?" Dick sputtered, his face now a truly impressive shade of purple. This is outrageous," he exclaimed. This is a farming complex. You've turned your backyard into a commercial operation." No, Dick," I corrected him, with mock seriousness. "It's an urban agriculture research site. There's a difference. And, as I said, it's perfectly legal. I have all the permits, all the approvals. You can check with the city if you'd like." Dick, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting. He was going to put a stop to this, once and for all. He was going to rally the forces of beige and banish my greenhouse from Silver Creek forever. The meeting, held that very evening, was, as expected, a complete circus. The community room was packed, filled with curious neighbors, supportive friends, and a few members of the local media who'd gotten wind of the greenhouse war brewing in Silver Creek. Dick, looking like he hadn't slept in days, took the podium, his face pale and drawn. He launched into a frantic, almost incoherent speech, denouncing my greenhouse as a menace, a blight on the landscape, and a clear and present danger to the aesthetic integrity of Silver Creek. This structure," he stammered, pointing at a picture of my greenhouse projected onto the screen, "is an abomination. It's industrial. It's too big. It's growing food." But it was too late. Dick's reign of terror was coming to an end. The community, it turned out, was not on his side. People started speaking up, defending the greenhouse, praising its innovative design, and, most importantly, raving about the delicious produce it was providing. Local school representatives talked about the educational opportunities the greenhouse offered, the chance for students to learn about sustainable agriculture and hydroponic farming. And then, the owner of a local farm-to-table restaurant stood up. "I've been buying produce from Mr. Gardner," he said, "and I have to say, it's some of the best I've ever tasted. This greenhouse is a valuable asset to our community, and we should be supporting it, not condemning it." Dick, desperate to regain control, made one final, fatal mistake. He called the city, again claiming my greenhouse was a zoning violation, a commercial operation in a residential area, a general nuisance. The city inspector, a woman named Susan Miller, arrived at the meeting, a weary expression on her face. She'd already inspected my greenhouse multiple times and found it to be in full compliance with all city ordinances. "Mr. Kensington," she said, her voice firm and clear, "I've told you before, and I'll tell you again. Mr. Gardner's greenhouse is perfectly legal. It meets all zoning requirements. It's a permitted structure. And, frankly, she added with a slight smile, it's a pretty impressive operation. He's doing a great job. That was it. The final nail in Dick Kensington's HOA coffin. The fallout from the meeting and from the city inspector's very public endorsement of my greenhouse was swift and decisive. Dick Kensington was finished. He was investigated by the city, by the police, for his vandalism. He was facing hefty fines. The HOA was also getting sued. Dick resigned from the HOA presidency in disgrace. His dreams of a perfectly uniform, vegetable-free Silver Creek shattered. He put his house up for sale, and, rumor had it, moved to a remote cabin in the mountains where he could presumably commune with nature without the interference of any pesky greenhouses. My greenhouse, meanwhile, continued to thrive. I expanded it, adding even more hydroponic systems, more grow lights, and a wider variety of plants. My backyard became a true urban farm, a testament to my determination, my ingenuity, and my love of fresh, homegrown food. I started supplying produce to local restaurants and farmers markets, turning my hobby into a small but profitable business. I even started offering tours of the greenhouse to local schools and community groups, educating people about sustainable agriculture and the joys of growing your own food. My story, the home gardener who beat the HOA with a giant greenhouse, went viral. I was interviewed by newspapers, magazines, and even appeared on a few national news programs. I became a minor celebrity, the poster boy for fighting back against unreasonable HOA rules. Then, one day, the inevitable occurred. A moving truck pulling up to a house on my street. New neighbors were moving in. A few weeks later, I was out in my greenhouse, tending to my plants, when the new neighbors, a young couple, approached me. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We are Sarah and Tom. We just moved in down the street. And we were just wondering, what's the deal with the massive state-of-the-art greenhouse in your backyard?" I smirked, adjusting my gardening gloves, which I now wore even when I wasn't gardening, just for the effect. "Oh, that?" I said, gesturing towards the gleaming glass structure. "It's a bit of a long story. It all started with a little HOA misunderstanding about vegetable gardens. And then I proceeded to tell them the whole glorious saga, from the first violation notice to the destruction of my original garden, to the construction of my greenhouse empire, to the downfall of Dick Kensington. They listened, their eyes widening with each increasingly absurd detail, their laughter growing louder with each twist and turn in the tale. "That's amazing," Tom said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually did all that?" "Every bit of it," I said proudly. "Well," Sarah said, grinning, "welcome to the neighborhood. We're glad to have you. And your greenhouse. I consider starting a motivational speaking business, maybe make more greenhouses. Who knows? The sky is the limit." The clerk, a guy who looked like he'd wrestled alligators for fun, just raised an eyebrow. "Your entire front yard?" "Yep," I said, trying to sound confident. "Going for a rustic look." "Rustic, huh?" He chuckled. "Well, you've come to the right place. What kind? Sweet corn, field corn, popcorn?" I blinked. The kind that grows tall?" He grinned. "I got just the thing. I've never considered myself a master gardener, but I've always enjoyed getting my hands dirty, nurturing plants, and adding a touch of color to the world. So when I moved into my new house in Silver Springs Meadow, one of the first things I did was create a small flower bed along the front walkway. It wasn't much, just a small patch of color along the walkway. Roses, daisies, and a few wildflowers I'd picked up at the local nursery. It was my little escape, my way of bringing a bit of nature to the otherwise sterile landscape of Silver Springs Meadow. I should have known that any attempt at beauty would be met with swift and merciless opposition from the HOA, I thought, as I admired my handiwork. The roses, a classic variety in shades of pink and red, were just beginning to bloom. The daisies, with their cheerful yellow centers and white petals, added a touch of brightness. And the wildflowers, a mix of poppies, cornflowers, and lupins, provided a splash of vibrant, untamed beauty. It was a simple pleasure, a small act of creative expression, a way to connect with the earth and add a bit of personality to my otherwise ordinary suburban home. The bees and butterflies seemed to appreciate it too, flitting from flower to flower, adding a touch of life and movement to the scene. Little did I know, my humble flower bed was about to become the epicenter of a suburban turf war. I just didn't realize how quickly or how absurdly that war would escalate. The knock on the door was sharp, insistent, and utterly devoid of any hint of neighborly warmth. It was the knock of a man on a mission, a man with a clipboard, a man who probably measured his grass with a ruler and alphabetized his canned goods by expiration date. Gerald Jerry Peterson. Picture a man whose wardrobe consisted entirely of pressed khakis and polo shirts, whose spirit animal was a perfectly manicured lawn, and whose favorite pastime was enforcing the HOA's endless list of rules and regulations. He was the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, the king of conformity, and, unfortunately for me, the president of the Silver Springs Meadow HOA. He stood on my porch, his expression a mixture of disapproval and righteous indignation, his clipboard clutched in his hand like a weapon. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice a dry, nasal drone, "I'm afraid I must address a matter of grave concern." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "Your flower bed." "My flower bed?" I replied, feigning innocence. "What about it?" "It's unkempt," he declared, his eyes narrowing. "It's disorderly. It simply does not conform to the aesthetic standards of our community." He said aesthetic standards as if Silver Springs Meadow were some kind of architectural masterpiece, rather than a collection of nearly identical houses. "The wildflowers, Mr. Carter, they're wild." "They're flowers, Jerry," I said, trying to remain calm. "They're supposed to be a little wild." "They're weeds, Mr. Carter," he retorted, his lips pursing. "And weeds are not permitted in Silver Springs Meadow. You need to replace them with HOA-approved shrubs, immediately." He gestured towards my carefully arranged flower bed, as if it were a biohazard. "Uniformity is key to a high-class neighborhood." Jerry, true to form, didn't just complain to me directly. He weaponized the HOA, unleashing the full force of its bureaucratic might upon my unsuspecting flower bed. Within days, I received an official notice, printed on crisp HOA-branded stationery. "Violation notice. Your flower bed does not comply with the HOA's approved landscape design. Please replace it with grass or HOA-approved shrubs immediately." The words were in bold, all caps, as if my colorful blooms were a threat to national security. The notice went on to cite some obscure bylaw about maintaining a cohesive community aesthetic and preventing visual chaos. It threatened escalating fines and potential legal action if I failed to comply within 14 days. "This is absurd," I thought, my internal monologue growing increasingly sarcastic. "My little flower bed is a threat to the neighborhood? It's a few roses and daisies, Jerry. It's not a jungle." The sheer pettiness of it all was astounding. The Silver Springs Meadow HOA, it seemed, had nothing better to do than micromanage their residents' landscaping choices and enforce a beige-toned dictatorship. I'd heard stories, of course, whispers of other HOA battles, Mrs. Gable and her overly pink flamingos, Mr. Henderson and his birdbath that was attracting the wrong sort of birds. Even young Timmy Smith and his lemonade stand shut down for being an unlicensed business. I tried to reason with Jerry. I explained that the flowers were attracting pollinators, that they were adding beauty to the neighborhood, that they were, in fact, quite harmless. I pointed out that other houses in the neighborhood had flower beds, some even more unkempt than mine. "Those are established gardens, Mr. Carter," he retorted, his eyes narrowing. "Yours is new and non-compliant." He refused to budge, his mind seemingly made up, his clipboard his only source of truth. I stood in my front yard, staring at the offending flower bed. The HOA's violation notice crumpled in my hand. I could comply, of course. I could rip out the flowers, replace them with grass, or some bland HOA-approved shrubs, and surrender to Jerry Peterson's demand for uniformity. But something inside me rebelled. This wasn't just about a flower bed. It was about principle. It was about the right to express my own individuality, to add a touch of color to my own property without being harassed by a power-hungry, aesthetically challenged tyrant. If Jerry and the HOA were so obsessed with uniformity, with control, with approved landscaping, then I'd give them something they couldn't control. I'd give them the opposite of a flower bed. I'd give them a cornfield, I thought. A new idea, bold and wonderfully ridiculous, beginning to take shape in my mind. A full-blown cornfield in my front yard. It was landscaping, wasn't it? It was technically a vegetable garden, which, according to the HOA bylaws, was permitted. And it was, without a doubt, the most gloriously inappropriate response to Jerry Peterson's demand for conformity that I could possibly imagine. The HOA rules mentioned non-functional decorative gardens being banned, but farmland? That was a new one. It was a loophole, a way to exploit the system's own absurdity, a chance to turn their obsession with rules against them. It was a plan so audacious, so unexpected, so utterly un-Jerry-like that it made me grin. "Gerald Peterson, you want a war on wildflowers? You've got one. Prepare to be cornered," I declared internally, a surge of defiant energy coursing through me. It was time to escalate. It was time to fight back. It was time to plant some corn. A lot of corn. Okay, so I decided to turn my front yard into a cornfield. The next logical step? Figure out how to actually grow corn. And more importantly, how to do it in a way that would maximally annoy Gerald Peterson without technically breaking any laws. Or, HOA bylaws, which are basically laws in Verdant Vista. My browser history went from best wildflower varieties to corn growing techniques, and is it legal to build a scarecrow in your front yard? In record time, I muttered, scrolling through pages of agricultural advice. I felt like I was prepping for the SATs, only instead of studying vocabulary, I was cramming on kernel density and tasseling. The HOA bylaws, bless their beige-loving hearts, were surprisingly vague on the topic of vegetable gardens. They encouraged them, actually, probably envisioning neat little rows of tomatoes and zucchini, not a towering wall of maize. There was that bit about non-functional decorative gardens being banned, but farmland? That was a new one even for them. And height restrictions? Nope, nothing. It was like they'd never even considered the possibility of someone weaponizing agriculture. I grinned. This was going to be fun. The trip to the farm supply store was an experience. I walked in, a city boy in slightly too clean jeans, and announced, "I need enough corn seed to plant my entire front yard." The clerk, a guy who looked like he'd wrestled alligators for fun, just raised an eyebrow. "Your entire front yard?" "Yep," I said, trying to sound confident. "Going for a rustic look." Rustic, huh? He chuckled. Well, you've come to the right place. What kind? Sweet corn, field corn, popcorn? I blinked. The kind that grows tall? He grinned. I got just the thing. He led me to a bin overflowing with seed corn, enough to feed a small army. Or, cover a suburban front yard. Getting the yard ready was less fun. My flower bed was easy enough to clear out. A bittersweet goodbye to the roses, but a necessary sacrifice in the war against beige. Then came the tilling. I rented one of those rototiller machines, the kind that looks like a lawnmower on steroids. It promptly tried to buck me off like a mechanical bull. "Having fun there, neighbor?" a voice called out. It was Mrs. Gable, peering over the fence, a mixture of amusement and concern on her face. "Just, aerating the soil," I yelled back, wrestling with the tiller. "Promoting healthy root growth." I'm pretty sure she didn't believe me, but she just smiled and shook her head. Jerry, on the other hand, was not smiling. He stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching me with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a particularly plump field mouse. He didn't say anything, but his glare spoke volumes. It said, "You're up to something, Carter, and I'm going to find out what it is." Challenge accepted, Jerry, challenge accepted. The corn grew and grew and grew. It was like watching a time-lapse video, only in real time. One day I had bare dirt. The next, tiny green shoots. And then, seemingly overnight, towering stalks that dwarfed my house. My front yard was no longer a yard. It was a field. A sea of green, rustling in the breeze, creating a surprisingly soothing sound, unless you were Jerry Peterson, in which case it probably sounded like the trumpets of the apocalypse. The neighbors were, shall we say, intrigued. At first, there were the cautious glances, the whispered conversations, the "what on earth is he doing?" looks. But then the curiosity kicked in. "So, Dale," Mr. Henderson said, sidling up to me one afternoon. "Growing a little corn, are we?" "Yep," I said, popping a kernel into my mouth. It wasn't quite ripe yet, but I was committed to the bit. "Going for that amber waves of grain look. Very patriotic, don't you think?" He chuckled. "It's certainly something." Even the kids loved it. They'd play hide-and-seek amongst the stalks, imagining themselves as explorers in a vast, green jungle. It was the best and cheapest entertainment in Verdant Vista. Jerry, of course, was losing his mind. He'd stomp past my house, his face a mask of fury, muttering about eyesores and property values, and the complete and utter degradation of suburban aesthetics. And then, I added the scarecrow. Not just any scarecrow, mind you. This one was special. It wore an old polo shirt and khakis I'd found at a thrift store. I topped it off with a pair of oversized glasses and a meticulously crafted clipboard made of cardboard. It was a masterpiece. I named him Mini Jerry. "Just keeping the birds away, Jerry!" I yelled cheerfully as he stormed past, his eye twitching uncontrollably. He didn't reply. He just kept walking, faster this time, his sensible shoes clicking furiously on the pavement. By midsummer, my front yard was a full-blown cornfield. The stalks were taller than me. The leaves rustled in the breeze, and the ears of corn were starting to ripen. It was a magnificent sight, a testament to the power of nature, and a healthy dose of spite. It was magnificent. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. And it was all completely 100% HOA loophole exploiting, and possibly a little bit insane, I thought, surveying my handiwork. It was time for the final touch, the detail that would truly solidify my status as the Corn King of Verdant Vista. I commissioned a small wooden sign, hand-painted with rustic lettering. It read in bold, playful letters, "Welcome to Peterson Family Farms." I mounted the sign at the edge of my property, near the sidewalk, where it would be clearly visible to every passerby, and, most importantly, to Jerry Peterson. It was the perfect finishing flourish, the cherry on top of my cornfield sundae. It was a declaration of ownership, a tongue-in-cheek nod to the absurdity of the situation, and a constant, unavoidable reminder of Jerry's impending doom. The stage was set, the corn was high, and the battle for suburban supremacy was about to reach its climax. And I had a feeling I knew exactly how Jerry would react. The unveiling of Peterson Family Farms was a moment I'd been eagerly anticipating, and Jerry Peterson's reaction did not disappoint. It was a meltdown of epic proportions, a Karen-esque explosion of rage and disbelief that would forever be etched in the annals of suburban legend. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd strategically positioned myself on my porch, sipping coffee and pretending to read a book, waiting for Jerry's daily property inspection walk. And right on cue, he rounded the corner, his khakis pressed, his polo shirt tucked in, his clipboard clutched tightly in his hand. He saw the cornfield, and he stopped. His reaction was physical. It was like watching a cartoon character whose head was about to explode. His jaw dropped, his eyes widened, and his face went through a series of colors that I didn't even know were possible. He sputtered, he stammered, he made a series of incoherent noises that sounded like a strangled goose attempting to yodel. Then the screaming started. This is unacceptable!" he shrieked, his voice reaching a pitch that could shatter glass and probably set off car alarms. He stormed towards my house, his sensible shoes clicking furiously on the pavement, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "You've turned your front yard into a farm. It's rural." I emerged from behind a particularly tall cornstalk, a picture of calm, unruffled composure. "Good morning, Jerry," I said, my voice dripping with feigned politeness. "I see you've noticed my new landscaping. What do you think? I was going for a rustic yet sustainable vibe." "It's corn!" he roared, his face now a shade of purple that I'd previously only seen on particularly ripe eggplants. It's tall, and there could be raccoons." He seemed particularly horrified by the possibility of raccoons, as if they were some kind of mythical corn-loving beasts that would descend upon the neighborhood and wreak havoc. "It's a vegetable garden, Jerry," I corrected him gently. "Perfectly within the HOA guidelines. You said no to non-functional decorative gardens, remember? This," I gestured towards the towering stalks of corn, "is highly functional. I plan to eat it." But, it's a field," he sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. It's unsuburban. It doesn't blend in." "I'm promoting sustainable urban agriculture, Jerry," I explained, with a perfectly straight face, "and providing a habitat for local wildlife. Plus," I added with a wink, "I think it adds a certain je ne sais quoi to the neighborhood, a touch of rustic charm." Watching Jerry's face contort with rage and disbelief was more satisfying than any perfectly arranged flower bed could ever be, I thought, struggling to suppress a laugh. He was practically vibrating with indignation, his perfectly pressed khakis threatening to spontaneously combust. It was a performance for the ages, a meltdown of epic proportions, and I was enjoying every second of it. Jerry, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding the immediate removal of my agricultural abomination. He envisioned a swift condemnation, a unanimous vote to dismantle my cornfield, a restoration of order and beige to Silver Springs Meadow. He was, as usual, in for a rude awakening. The meeting, held in the same beige-walled community center room, which, I noticed, was starting to look even more drab in comparison to my vibrant green cornfield, was a scene of utter chaos. Jerry, looking increasingly frantic and disheveled, presented a PowerPoint presentation titled "Cornfield Chaos: Why Urban Agriculture Threatens Our Suburban Way of Life." The presentation was a masterpiece of fear-mongering and hyperbole, filled with blurry photos of my cornfield, exaggerated claims about its negative impact on property values, and a series of increasingly unlikely scenarios. Slide 1. Raccoon infestation, a threat to our pets and children, with a picture of a cartoon raccoon wearing a bandit mask. Slide 2. Excessive noise pollution, the rustling of leaves will drive us mad, with a picture of a sound wave labeled danger. Slide 3. Attracting undesirable elements, farmers, with a picture of a silhouetted figure wearing overalls and a straw hat. Slide 4. The complete and utter destruction of our neighborhood's aesthetic harmony, with a picture of my cornfield next to a picture of a perfectly manicured, utterly boring beige house. His arguments were met with a mixture of skepticism, amusement, and outright hostility. The other HOA members, it turned out, were not as enthusiastic about banning cornfields as Jerry had hoped. Some were secretly impressed by my audacity. Others were simply tired of Jerry's constant complaining. And a few, I suspected, were secretly hoping I'd share some of my harvest. While Jerry fumed and plotted, the rest of the neighborhood was embracing my cornfield with open arms. What had started as a source of curiosity and amusement quickly became a point of local pride. A quirky landmark, a symbol of Silver Springs Meadows' slightly rebellious spirit. Families would stroll through the cornfield, admiring the towering stalks, the rustling leaves, and the surprisingly peaceful atmosphere. Children would play hide-and-seek amongst the rows, imagining themselves as explorers in a vast green jungle. Teenagers started using the cornfield as a backdrop for their social media posts, adding a touch of rural charm to their selfies. Even some of the older residents, the ones who'd initially sided with Jerry, started to come around, admitting that the cornfield was rather attractive and added a certain je ne sais quoi to the neighborhood. And then the ultimate validation. The local farmers market contacted me, asking if I'd be willing to host a suburban harvest festival in my cornfield. They envisioned a community event with hayrides, corn mazes, pumpkin carving, and of course plenty of fresh, locally grown, or rather yard-grown, corn on the cob. It was a public relations triumph, a community relations coup, and a constant, unavoidable reminder of Jerry Peterson's defeat. The cornfield, once a source of controversy, was now a celebrated local attraction, a testament to the power of creative landscaping and the enduring appeal of fresh produce. Jerry, desperate to regain control, tried every trick in the book to force me to remove my cornfield. He cited obscure bylaws. He misinterpreted zoning regulations. He even tried to claim that the scarecrow, Mini Jerry, was a safety hazard and an unauthorized structure. But it was no use. The HOA's lawyer, the long-suffering Mr. Henderson, a recurring character in my suburban battles, it seemed, was forced to explain, yet again, that there was nothing they could do. The cornfield, he pointed out, was technically a vegetable garden, and the HOA bylaws explicitly permitted vegetable gardens. There were no restrictions on crop selection, crop height, or the overall size of the garden. But it's corn! Jerry sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. It's tall. Yes, Mr. Henderson replied with a sigh. It is, but it's also legal. I made sure to repeatedly use phrases like sustainable urban agriculture, community garden, and eco-friendly landscaping, just to twist the knife a bit more. And then, the final glorious twist. The mayor of Town Name himself showed up at my cornfield, accompanied by a local news crew. He praised my initiative, my commitment to sustainable living, and my creative use of urban space. He even posed for a photo with me, standing in front of the Peterson Family Farms sign, a giant grin on his face. The news segment, which aired that evening, was titled, "Suburban Resident Turns Front Yard into Thriving Cornfield, Defies HOA." It was the ultimate humiliation for Jerry Peterson, a public declaration of his defeat, and a testament to the power of a well-placed cornfield. The downfall of Gerald Jerry Peterson, the self-proclaimed guardian of suburban aesthetics, the terror of wildflowers, was swift and decisive. After the disastrous HOA meeting, the mayor's visit, the glowing news report, and the undeniable popularity of my cornfield, he finally cracked. He resigned from the HOA, his letter of resignation a rambling, incoherent mess of accusations, self-pity, and thinly veiled threats. He blamed everyone but himself for his defeat, claiming he was the victim of a coordinated campaign of harassment, a neighborhood-wide conspiracy to undermine his authority, and a general decline in standards of decency and good taste. He even, in a final act of delusional grandeur, referred to himself as a martyr for the cause of suburban uniformity. Nobody bought it. Within weeks, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of his perfectly manicured and utterly corn-free lawn. He sold his house quickly, at a slight loss. The market, it seemed, was not as enthusiastic about beige conformity as he was, and moved away, presumably to inflict his brand of joyless tyranny on some other unsuspecting community. His departure was met with a collective sigh of relief, followed by a spontaneous neighborhood celebration, held naturally amidst the towering stalks of my cornfield. Peterson Family Farms, as my front yard was now affectionately known, became a local legend, a quirky landmark, a symbol of the neighborhood's slightly rebellious spirit. People would drive from miles around just to see it, to take pictures, to marvel at the sheer audacity of planting a full-blown cornfield in the middle of suburbia. It became a popular backdrop for social media posts, graduation photos, and even a few, surprisingly artistic, engagement announcements. Tourists, actual tourists, started showing up, asking for directions to the Cornfield house and inquiring about its history. But the best part, for me, was watching the neighborhood children interact with the cornfield. They'd run through the rows, playing hide-and-seek, imagining themselves as explorers in a vast green jungle. They'd build forts, create secret pathways, and generally treat my front yard like their own personal playground. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated joy, a testament to the power of nature and a healthy dose of petty revenge to transform even the most sterile of environments. The cornfield, once a source of controversy, was now a source of community pride, a place where neighbors could gather, connect, and celebrate the sheer absurdity of it all. To celebrate our victory and to officially inaugurate the cornfield as a community asset, I hosted a neighborhood BBQ, a cornfield cookout, featuring, of course, a menu centered around the star of the show. We had fresh corn on the cob, grilled to perfection, and slathered with butter and salt. We had cornbread, warm and crumbly, made with cornmeal ground from my own harvest. We had homemade popcorn, popped in a giant kettle over an open fire, carefully supervised, of course, and well away from the actual cornfield. And for the adults, I even offered a special limited edition corn whiskey, a surprisingly potent concoction that I'd brewed myself, using a recipe I'd found online, and a still I'd purchased under the guise of home brewing equipment. It was a glorious, chaotic, and utterly delicious event. Neighbors mingled, children laughed, and the air was filled with the scent of grilled corn, wood smoke, and the sweet, sweet taste of victory. Even the scarecrow, Mini Jerry, seemed to be enjoying himself, his straw-stuffed body swaying gently in the breeze, his painted-on frown somehow looking less menacing than usual. With Jerry gone, and the support for the Cornfield, the HOA was a changed organization. New board members were appointed, and rather than enforcing rules, they were tasked with making sure those ridiculous rules were removed. And so I remained, the unlikely Corn King of Silver Springs Meadow, the accidental champion of suburban agriculture. My front yard, once a battleground in the war against HOA tyranny, was now a symbol of victory, a testament to the power of creative landscaping and the enduring appeal of fresh produce. It was a warm summer evening. I was sitting on my porch, wearing a straw hat, a gift from a grateful neighbor, sipping a glass of my surprisingly potent corn whiskey, and watching the fireflies dance among the towering stalks of corn. A new neighbor, a young couple who'd just moved in down the street, walked by. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We're new to the neighborhood. We were just wondering, what's the deal with the cornfield?" I smiled. "It's a long story," I said. "But the short version is, I had a disagreement with the HOA about a flower bed." They laughed, intrigued. "Well," the man said, "it's certainly unique." "It is," I agreed. "It is." Who knew that a flower bed and a burning desire for revenge could lead to all this? "I guess sometimes you just gotta plant a cornfield to find your peace," I thought, as I watched the new neighbors walk away, shaking their heads and chuckling. I raised my glass of corn whiskey in a silent toast. To the Peterson family farms, may it forever stand as a monument to the triumph of agriculture over conformity, and a warning to all future HOA tyrants.